Hello, and welcome to Ask the Expert, the show where you can speak to experts directly to get your questions answered. I'm looking in the chat and it looks like we already have some people rolling in. It's really exciting to see you all join us today. As you are rolling in and seeing this chat, please put in the chat your questions for us. We're going to be working on Azure Container Apps today, deploying with Azure Developer CLI, a Python 3.11 application, with our resident expert. So Azure makes it easy for you to move in with Azure Container Apps. And so in this session, our cloud developer advocate, Jay Miller, will be answering your questions on how to take a containerized application and deploy it to Azure here. So my name's Dawn Wages. I'm the Python community advocate here at Microsoft, and I'm really excited to be your host today. So next up, I'd love to introduce Jay, our expert.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I am excited to show folks what we've been working on a little bit for a month now, and sneak peek on what's going to kind of be the thing that we talk about a lot at PyCon US. So, which is happening next week. If you're in the Salt Lake area, or if you're in the Python community, come hang out and say hi. And even if you're not in Salt Lake, like do it virtually. We're gonna have a lot of stuff, including some swag and some prizes that you can win. And I'm going to show you how to do it in this stream.
There's the virtual PyCon, and then there's also virtually we're on Discord, so you can hang out with us on Discord too.
I like it. So should we get started in showing folks what we will ultimately like them to try to accomplish?
Yeah, let's jump in. We have a lot to cover today.
All right, so this is the site that we are going to be deploying. And if we look here, it's actually already deployed. And we deployed it using Azure Container Apps. Now, last week, we showed you how you can deploy Python 3.11 really easy using just VS Code or even a little bit of AZD. But this time, we're doing everything inside of a container. And one of the biggest reasons for that is we don't expect you to always be starting from zero. And we also understand that a lot of projects on the web are not simply, a fast API application with no database and you just run with them. Sometimes there are things that are complex. And in order to make things safe, secure, reliable, scalable, it requires a little bit more effort. And we do really believe that AZD is probably one of the easier ways to do that with Azure. So I've built this, and we're actually going to be following the steps using this amazing lab that we've created, this Azure Samples, Azure Django Postgres ACA. We actually have a lab for you. So if you go to this repo, you can see there's a lot of stuff happening in here. We have, expand this a little bit. So, well, actually it's not going to make the screen larger. So it has everything from Key Vault, which is like a secured key storage. We have one container. Obviously we could have multiple containers if we wanted to set it up like that, but we have one container. And then we have a Postgres database that's sitting on the outside that we're talking to. So we're going to deploy all of this with effectively like 3 commands. So let's jump into that. Now, obviously, this is already up and running, so we don't have to worry too much about how long it's going to take. And I am going to run a couple of commands early, and then we can kind of go back and explain them only because these commands do take a little bit of time. So instead of deploying to my existing one, instead, we're going to create a new project. And I'll just call it JM Django PG. Why not? So we'll create that new project. We're going to CD into it. And I know I'm in a terminal. I'm not in VS Code. Don't worry, we're getting there. Code. And then now we are in that folder.
Nice.
And yeah, I think there's a question to have the repo added to the chat. Absolutely. If you go to, I know it's github.com / Azure samples, and then it's Azure Django Postgres ACA, but we'll have a link in the chat for you. So now that we've gotten here, this is an empty folder. There's nothing in the folder, nothing up my sleeves. I'm actually going to have to type that URL in myself, because the way that we can actually pull down this code from GitHub into our own folder is by using AZD. Now, if you're unfamiliar with AZD, it is a way to provide all of the management details, all of the deployment spec details inside of your project, so that instead of having to write scripts to handle provisioning, instead of having to remember the Azure CLI commands to now I need to spin up my resource group, then I need to spin up my container registry, then I need to spin up my key vault, then I need to spin up my database. And if I do things in the wrong order, stuff may not work correctly. What we've let you do is create infrastructure as code, so that you can write all of these steps in a bicep template and then deploy them using simple commands like AZD up, AZD deploy, AZD down when you're ready to take everything down. And that's super important because, again, we don't want to necessarily pay for things because we forgot to take something down. And also, I'll reveal a little bit. We actually ran into a bug this morning where I didn't remove one of my key vault entries and then tried to redeploy, and it was like, hey, that key vault already exists. I don't know what to do. So like, had I done it the right way with AZD down, or done it the simpler way with AZD down, and we're going to have a purge command too, I wouldn't have had to have worried about that. It would have deleted everything, and then we would have been able to get up and going again relatively quickly.
That's a great segue for my very primer question. So what should we know for this tutorial to follow along? What are some key skills we should start with?
So we are deploying a Django app. You might see some Django code floating about. It would be good if you were at least familiar with Django. You don't have to have developed anything with it. You don't have to, maintain it on a daily basis, but you'll see manage.py. You'll see things like migrate or run server. These commands are very Django oriented. You'll also see a little bit of, we're going to look at the bicep template. I am going to give you the secret. The secret sauce with bicep templates is the less that you play with the bicep template, the easier it is for you. So having an understanding and being able to look at the bicep template and kind of have an idea of what's happening is good, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary.
Okay.
Now, the last part is we are going to be working with containerized applications. So having a little bit of familiarity with Docker or like Docker Compose or any of the cloud native tools is probably going to go a long way with this. Again, it probably is required since we're talking about deploying a containerized application, but I don't want people to get discouraged of like, oh, I have to be a Docker expert. You absolutely don't. In fact, what we do is we ride on the backs of giants, and we look at images that already exist out in the wild, and then we just modify them slightly to have the things that we need on there. That way we're not, having to maintain and update stuff.
And it also sounds like if you're a Docker expert, all of those skill sets still apply and transfer over and can still be helpful. So that's good, knowing under the hood, it's all still Docker.
Absolutely. So we're going to grab this URL. And I will tell you, if you want to follow along, we do have this lab here that you can run through. We're not going to be going through all of the lab because the lab is designed to help walk you through both the Django and the like AZD of it all. We're going to be focusing on the AZD of it all.
Okay.
So we're going to go to this fast track here. And fast track is for people who have a good familiarity with Python, a good familiarity with Django, and just more want to focus on what's happening with AZD. So we're actually just going to copy this first command, which is azd init-t. And this is doing a couple of things. In fact, this is almost similar to pulling down a template from GitHub. azd init-t is going to look at that repo. It's going to add all of the files in the repo. We're going to see this happening in just a second. And we'll see a bunch of that. There we go. And then it's added some other information, and now it's prompting us and saying, hey, what do you want this environment to be called? We're going to use, again, JM, Django, PG. We're going to say, okay. And it's going to say, hey, you're done. That's it. We've taken care of everything else. Now, obviously, that would just be cheating, but I'm going to roll with it still, and I'm going to run the next command, which is just going to be azd up.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason I'm doing that is because if I don't, we will be waiting a very long time while this is running, and we may not actually get to see it successfully run. So,
but it's also doing a lot of stuff in that time period. So we'll be talking through that too. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And as you can see, even as we're looking at this right now, it's creating our resource group. It's going to start creating all those resources, and we can open this portal and see all of the different steps that are happening in our dashboard.
Right. Great.
So let's see. Right now, it's just, hey, we're creating our monitoring, we're creating our key vault, we're creating our Postgres. And then once all of that's done, it'll have more things that have to be loaded. So this is just the starting point. So let's go back to VS Code, and let's take a look at this kind of structure here. Now, all of the code itself is in demo code. This is everything we have here. This is our project. And we see we even have like a Docker file here. And our Docker file is just loading from the Python 3.11 tooling. Let's go to that. It's doing some updates on things. It's installing a Postgres client in case we need to do some local debugging. And then it's just installing requirements, and it's jumping into this entry point. Now, that entry point is super important because that's going to be the command that runs once everything is up and running. Okay. So it's going to deploy everything, get all this stuff added, add our key vault stuff, add all these other tools. And then it's going to say, now what do I do? And the now what do I do is entry point.shell. So it's going to run this. As we mentioned before, it's going to migrate our database. Django has this database migration layer that you need to make sure all of your values look correct, and as things change, it kind of changes with you. So that's why we're doing this migrate. We're going to pre-seed our data. This is kind of an optional step. This is so that when we go to our fancy website here, when we go to our website here, we're not going to just be looking. I think this actually stood down, so it's going to take a second to spin back up. By the way, we are operating on all of the free resources. So if you want to see kind of the performance level that you get for free, this is going to be it. Unfortunately, using ACA, the benefit of ACA is that you can scale as little or as much as you like. That scaling includes 0. So if it's not being used, you're not paying for it because it's not running. It's completely scaled down. And it is pretty rough on, if I think it's like a 5-minute cooldown on that. So if it takes a long time to load the first time around, that's because it's scaled down to 0 and it's got to spin back up. But as we can see here, we have some data already in here where we can look at different tours. We can see different, Neptune. We can do the cold tour. The cold tour has all of these on it. We have, the warm tour, which I think includes so we have some basic navigation stuff. We can even request information and fill out a form on here.
Cool.
So we have to have that data in, and that's what this load seed data is. Then we're collecting all of our static assets, and then the big command, which is running green unicorn, providing our whiskey application, and then giving it all of the information that we need, setting up the workers, setting up cooldown times, timeouts, and then binding to our port. If you've ever
Cool.
worked with Docker, a lot of this stuff, especially with Django, a lot of this stuff is going to seem second nature. You have to create certain ports, you have to expose those ports and make them available. And the nice thing about that is, because we're doing a lot of this stuff inside of like Python,
Mm-hmm.
in Azure has a lot of like glorious features built in,
Mm-hmm.
to where some of the things that we would normally have to like double check and do, if you notice there isn't like an expose 8000 on here. When I run this command, I would normally have to do like docker start port 8000, then I would have to expose 8000 in my Docker file. I don't have to do that because AZD and Azure are covering a lot of this for me. I think that's actually just Azure. I don't think AZD has anything to do with that part. But
And
maybe it does. We'll see.
I spy with my little eye, Python 3.11.
Yep.
And just to shout you out, you wrote a really great blog post like a few months back about Microsoft contribution in making faster C Python. So check out that blog post. It's really, really great. It's been going like gangbusters all over the internet. So
I appreciate that. I'm actually excited to see, there's a team, the Faster C Python team at Microsoft, that does a lot of work. And this was like step one in I think it's a 5-year plan. And I actually got to see some of the Python enhancement proposal get approved for even more efficiencies that are going to show up in 3.12 and 3.13.
nice.
So yeah, we're definitely doing a lot on the forefront to improve Python's performance and efficiencies across the board.
Cool.
So let's dive into this infra folder. This is going to be the thing that I think I want people to just like focus on a little bit, take a sip of coffee, and just relax on, because we are going to have a lot of stuff happening in that time. I didn't set my do not disturb on. Let's do that really quick. Save ourselves a little bit of, who knows who's going to message me. But this infra folder is where all of our bicep files live. Now, you could have everything in one bicep folder. It would be a lot of configuration, and if you were to do it all by yourself, it would be incredibly challenging, because you are writing the infrastructure steps that are building this site. As you can see now, I think we're actually almost done here. We've been adding things, we're deploying our services, we're pushing an image still. So what the awesome team behind AZD have done is they've created this really great resource that I'm going to share. It's called aka.ms/awesome AZD. I think I spelled that wrong. There is a dash in there. Let's try that again. aka.ms awesome -AZD. And what you'll see here are a bunch of different templates that are already pre-configured. Now, we could just go to the Django one. We could see Python Workshop on Django and Azure. It's actually the same application, just slightly different. There's a few changes in here. And we can see Python Django app with Postgres, another similar app. This is a restaurants review app. And what will happen is we can just copy the infra folder from them. And in fact, that's actually what I did. When I did that AZD init-t, I pulled down the existing infra template for what I'm trying to build, as well as all the other code that goes in with deploying it. So our hope is that everybody out there watching will wind up going in and saying, hey, I've built this tool that I've deployed to Azure. It uses, ACA, and maybe it uses Azure Functions, and maybe it uses something else. And then from there, it allows you to then go ahead, get credit for you being the person that built this. But then also other people can see, oh, wow, they already have an infra folder set up on how to deploy this. I can just use theirs. And then I only have to change a couple of little bits of information. And we've really been working hard to make sure that the we have these like core folders in here that have everything that you would need. If you wanted to set up MongoDB inside of Cosmos database, like it's all here, it's all keyed out so that you just have to provide little bits of information and then really get going. If you notice, I didn't have to provide any information. I just did azd-init-t, load my stuff. And then from there, it was azd up. I didn't have to provide any data, and it just worked, other than providing which subscription that I want my account to go under. So I would highly suggest check out these templates. And from there, you can go in and find something that's very similar to what you're trying to deploy and use that as the starting point. Now, we can walk through a little bit of what we're doing here, and it is going to start with main.bicep. My goodness. So we have this little target scope, which is a subscription. I'm blazing through this because honestly, I don't want people to get too caught up in like all of the things that we're adding, but there are some things that are important to bring up. So like name, location, these are all going to be normal. Now, Postgres password, obviously we're using Postgres. We're using Azure Postgres for this. I don't want to share my Postgres password. Honestly, I don't even want to know my Postgres password, which is why we're using Azure Key Vault. AZD is actually going to create Key Vault for us, and then it's going to generate a random key so that we don't have to. So we're just referencing this random key that we don't even know. So I can't tell you what the password is. I honestly don't know what it is. It's been randomized. And it'll persist throughout our deployment. So if we redeploy this again, we don't have to worry about, oh, well, did the password change? Did our Django secret key change, which could cause some issues on the Django side? Everything is persisted and then just going through. And from there, you know, we have our web image, principal ID. A lot of these things are kind of default. They're standard. And here we go. We talked about that Key Vault thing. I will give you our Postgres users, Postgres, and our Postgres database is Relic Cloud. That's fine. I can share that with you. If we wanted to make these secrets, we could make them secrets too. It's okay. But then, yeah, we create this Key Vault here. We have this Key Vault resource group. We go from there. We're creating our principal ID. As I mentioned before, like I don't even know the Key Vault name. It's like doing a prefix of my resource group ID and all this other stuff. And it's making all of this stuff for me. I don't want to have to memorize that stuff because I will forget it. Yep. I have very, very horrible selective memory. Ask my mother. But from there, we also have our Postgres server. We're adding all of this. One of the things that I would like to see in the future is support for Docker Compose with AZD, because that means that we could actually embed our Postgres server into our image. We pulled it out because we didn't want our database and our web application running on the same instance. That way, if we're scaling up or scaling down, we could have multiple instances of the web app running, all still connecting to the same database architecture.
Okay.
So from there, we throw our version in. I can't wait for version 15 support. That's going to be so great. I just watched someone talk about that. And then we have monitoring set up. We actually have a bunch of monitoring built into the application. So we're not only getting like how much traffic is coming, but we're also getting things like if there's an error on the actual application, we don't have to go in and start diving through stuff or pull it down locally and then start testing. We can actually go in here and see what's happening. Now, a birdie in the form of this little window here tells me that we're one, running low on time, and two, that the deployment's done. So nice. Let's click that and boom, it's up. This is a different URL, and I will prove this by going to the other URL. See, URL 1, container app.purplecliff, some characters, and this one is JM Django PG, container app, icy grass, another one. And we have the same features. So this allows you to then, if you wanted to do something similar, use this as your default starter for your Django application. You could do the exact same command, take out my Django application, put in your own Django application. Yeah. And just like that, you now can deploy a Django application using Python 3.11 with Postgres, with using Azure Postgres, and Key Vault to secure all of your secret keys and things like that. and you don't have to go through the stresses or the drama of like, well, I need to change these values to do these things and other things. Uh, we've got 5 minutes left. I think we can ask some questions. And while we're asking those questions, I'm going to do the thing that I always forget to do, and that's tear down my site now that I'm done with it. So I'm going to do azd down dash dash purge. That's going to remove the key vault so that if I wanted to recreate it in the future, it's not going to say, hey, this is persisted still, what's happening.
We have a really good question. Do you have any ACA examples with multiple containers and different subnets using Azure AD auth? It's very specific use case.
Wow.
Yeah. But it could be, do you know if do we have it? And then where would it be to find some of these specific use cases?
I would say if it were going to be anywhere that was easy to find, it would
Mhm.
be in here. Awesome AZD. We can, I think we can search. Well, that's just for a site name in general. You
Mhm.
were looking for something with a VNet. So, oh, hey, look, there's a VNet tab here. Let's get rid of that. So we do have, it looks like we have a couple of examples that are using different VNets. I do know that we do have examples running about. I don't know exactly how they scale, but with multiple containers is probably going to be the thing that makes me say probably not. But I think that would be a really cool example, and I do hope that we have some ears listening in. And if not, I can take that back to the AZD team and share with them of like, hey, we had a really cool request from Carl that wants ACA with like multiple containers with different subnets, and then tie it all together with Azure AD auth. That's super cool. And if you beat us to it, just hit this contribute button here,
Yeah.
and you can then submit your own template. So there's
Awesome.
another question here.
Mhm.
Don, do you want to go the one from CDF?
Sure, yeah. So, how can I give access to developers to read container app log stream data? And a two-parter, the container app user log messages are truncating, how to avoid it?
So this is the first answer. I don't honestly know. I think that giving access to developers to read container app log stream data, I think you would just have to do that inside of your Azure portal. There is like access management features there.
Mhm.
You would just have to make sure you set them up with the right scope in terms of permissions.
Yeah.
That said, I haven't played around with that, so I'm sorry, but that's a good question that we can definitely take back, and maybe someone can come back and answer. The second one, though, container app user log messages being truncated. That is actually one of the things that I had mentioned before with our Django app. I've been working with the Open Telemetry team, and right now we're still using Open Census, but we are working on creating an Open Telemetry endpoint. And the nice thing about that is that means that we can take a lot of our messages that we get, especially when we're inside of our application, and we don't have to use just our log stream, which by design is it has to kind of be flexible to work with a bunch of different applications. Instead, we can pipe those directly into our Azure monitor and create an Azure dashboard that pulls any of those error messages that might be coming up and pulls them directly into that instead. Now, I don't know if we have it set up here. We might have it set up here. You can actually see this is how we're accessing our key vault data here.
Okay.
Again, I don't know any of that information, so I just kind of go with it. And I want to see, yep, we do. So we have our open census tracing here. And there is a lot of good information in the Learn modules on how to go about setting up open census. And again, I know a lot of folks are really excited about open telemetry. We are going to be supporting open telemetry very, very, very soon. I know the people working on it, and they're excited for what they're going to be able to show you. In fact, we're probably going to talk about it a little bit at PyCon in a few, or I said a few weeks. Wow, like in a few days.
It's
Like
getting
6 days,
there.
6 days from today. So
Cool.
awesome. I think we're out of time.
Yeah, we're all done on time. This was so cool to learn about. You went through a lot of things in a quick flash, so I'm so excited to be able to talk to you today.
It was a
Thank you all
whirlwind.
for all joining. It's been great.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.